Hello, and welcome to the Launchpad Podcast. In this show, we discuss commercialization strategies for drugs and devices across the globe that really challenge the status quo. And we also highlight change agents that are behind this movement, that are behind disrupting life sciences and really pushing the bounds of value based care and in a more complex promotional landscape. And in today's topic, we're going to be talking about something very unique and disruptive: omnichannel education, which is the future of promotion and how life sciences leaders really think about their organizations. And we have a very special guest, Scot Noel, a great friend of mine. And Scott brings over 17 years of life sciences experience in sales and marketing. Every time I've talked to Scott, I've learned more about marketing, and there are a lot of brand principles and marketing principles that have transformed the marketing landscape in the last decade, i.e., omnichannel marketing. Today, we'll learn about how those principles can be applied to other areas in a life sciences organization, specifically through the lens of education. And currently, Scott is the CEO and founder of NOELEDGE Consulting, a healthcare marketing consultancy based in Seattle area. Scott not only enables and supports clients by offering unique marketing acumen, but NOELEDGE Consulting really acts as strategy partners and thought partners to life sciences companies that are developing content and brand strategies to really expand their business while improving operational efficiencies. And with all the amazing work that Scott does, he also, when I met him in Seattle about 2 or 3 years ago, he also had the best recommendation of salmon, and it's perhaps one of the best salmons that I've ever had, which was in Seattle, right by the wharf. Scott, such a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for taking time. And I know I'm chomping at the bits to learn more about some of the trends in marketing, some of the trends in life sciences industry, and really the future of education in life sciences. Scott, a very warm welcome to you. Welcome to the Launchpad Podcast.
Well, thank you, Parth. I'm really excited to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. Scott, maybe that's a great place for us to start. Myself and the audience would love to hear a little bit more about your background and all the rich experience you have in the last 17 years. Condense in a soundbite as much as you can.
So I started my journey in the healthcare arena about 25 years ago. I started out as a MRI technologist in the Seattle area, and then about 20 years ago or so, I pivoted into kind of the business side of it with Philips Healthcare, doing training and education for physicians and technologists, and then kind of evolved into the marketing role, doing traditional kind of field marketing and product launches and KOL development and sales training. And that's kind of carried me through other industries in oncology and medical device over the last 17 years.
That's amazing, Scott. And it's so awesome to have someone of your experience that has really seen the full breadth and the spectrum of the care continuum, as you call it. And we've been running with that notion ever since. So, Scott, maybe this is a great place for us to start is, when we think about the care continuum as your drugs and devices are going from lab to market to bedside and beyond, I know the number one question on every leader's mind, whether they are in all the way upstream in clinical and compliance, or if they are on the commercial side, sales and marketing, or medical affairs, the big question is, with everything that has happened in 2020, what is the future going to look like? And would love to start off by just asking you, what are some of the big trends that you're seeing take place in the industry?
Sure. So let's kind of start with the end point, which is really the patients, because obviously they're the ones that kind of are the end stages for all the activities that marketing and research and development all do, even from the sales engagement. But from the patient standpoint, what we certainly have seen is because of COVID, obviously the amount of visits they're able to do is dramatically reduced, which has spawned the expansion of telehealth. and also another kind of virtual engagements. But the thing is that as healthcare providers and the industry has been trying to adjust to that, it's not been as smooth as it's needed to be. I think patients have probably been less to be more proactive about their care. I think diagnosis and virtual treatment and prescriptions have been not consistent because of that adjustment over time. And then also, obviously, the engagement, specifically for life sciences folks to engage with their physicians, what they're used to doing face to face, has now had to face this new reality of virtual engagement, which is a whole Pandora's box of skill sets that need to be kind of uplifted.
Very interesting. So Scott, if I play that back, essentially there are changes that are happening from the patient realm, changes that are happening for healthcare providers, and then also changes internally from an operational standpoint and how we think about promotional strategies itself. And maybe we double click on the as you said, on the patient side of things first. From patient's vantage point, what do you think? What is the future of the relationship between life sciences companies and patients in this new environment? How does that relationship evolve, if at all, or does it go back to how things were?
It's a great question. I think really importantly, from the patient aspect of it, is obviously there's been a huge explosion in digital engagement. Marketing teams and life sciences groups have really been pushing out their digital because of the fact that face-to-face engagement is now such more of a challenge. But that also means that people are getting hit with a ton of different information, and it's kind of hard to sort out which one do I listen to. And most patients will tend to listen to their friends and family. Unfortunately, I think in some cases they will evolve it to social media and their favorite internet browser to kind of diagnose and look for information. But what I think is really pivotal for life sciences to do is to really work with their HCPs. Also, companies that have the resources and expertise to kind of collate the information that's meaningful so that they can communicate specific messages, specific education information, so that there's a little more consolidation about a central source of truth so that they can make more confident decisions going forward, so that the patient actually feels like they're part of the decision process and not just kind of an effect of it.
Scott, that's a very interesting view. So from industry's vantage point, they can be that source of trusted information. Is that kind of the big idea there in building out that relationship with patients moving forward?
I do. I think that for life sciences companies to kind of build that, continue to build the relationships with their providers, is to be able to collate that information in a meaningful way. And that means taking it not only just from the data that they have for their products, is also accessing real world healthcare information and also third party information together, so that they really kind of get a kind of a whole universal look at what's kind of going on around a certain therapeutic area, but then also be able to customize it, because that's really kind of where patients are wanting, is they want things that are kind of more customized around their lifestyle, so that they're not always having to change and adjust. And if they do have to change and adjust their lifestyle, to be educated on why that may be. So then that way, I think the benefit of that, a halo effect of that, if you will, is the fact that they get to spread that to their family and friends, so that better healthcare processes and better healthcare outcomes could potentially be the result.
That's very very interesting and powerful, Scott. One of the things that we often hear from organizations is, in the industry generally, is definitely patient centricity forms so much of their views and the decisions, as it should, and it's increasing. One interesting thing that we've always heard and seen is the capacity to do that because of regulations, to building those direct, in the direct to consumer realm, what can and cannot be said. How does that evolve in the future as we look forward? Does the regulatory framework evolve, or life sciences companies find more meaningful and effective ways within the regulatory framework. For example, using digital to build those authentic relationships with patients. I guess where I'm getting to is in being those beacons of trusted information, which the industry certainly can, because as you said, they can collate so much and spearhead that initiative. How do they work within the regulatory framework with that right intent?
Sure. Well, I'd say from a regulatory standpoint, it's really about validating the proof points of the product. I mean, without getting too into the weeds, it's your claims need to be backed up by data. And so right now, since 2016, since the Obama administration had put in an act to be able to start leveraging real world data, the FDA now pretty much almost begs for it. They ask for it. They want real world data. So do payers, and so do, a lot of the insurance industry, because it's more of a resemblance of kind of what's going on versus just doing trials. The benefit of this, though, is also the fact of real world data is going to be hopefully better trial design, better, because the patients are going to be able to be found in the right place at the right time with the right qualifications, and hopefully there's going to be better consistency in the patient's adherence to it. So I think, from that aspect of it, on the digital side for compliance, is they're going to be able to have the data to be able to put forward to the regulatory agencies, but also for the organizations to be able to put towards the payers that, that not only is there just, trial data there's real world data that we have here to back this up. And that's also, based on probably electronic medical records, disease databases, and then also just kind of real world, like kind of at home internet devices where things are kind of being monitored.
Scott, thank you for sharing that. So, am I understanding correctly that essentially with the more robust data that you have, and you're going beyond the clinical trials, you're collecting that real world evidence in earnest, and that is also enabling your capacity and ability to have more to be more proactive in connecting with patients as well as healthcare providers. Am I understanding that correctly?
Not only just proactive, but also to be able to segment your customer base, whether it's HCPs and your patients, to be able to be more precise on the kind of value that you're trying to drive. So if you look at it from an omnichannel marketing perspective, instead of just using multi-channel, and the omnichannel aspect is you're communicating or having the communication avenues open for those that want to take it in at the time they want it, when they want it, and how much they want to take it in. So for them, there's going to probably be more of a connection of them being able to absorb that information and utilize it. And on the same front, for the organizations using the real world data, it's going to give them that ability to segment their precise customer base and be able to augment and customize the message for them, because that's what people are really kind of wanting today. I'm not part of the, I may be part of this general pool, but I want something specific for me and how I live. And so I want something that kind of resonates with that so that I can, kind of continue living my life the way I'd like to.
Absolutely. Scott, really powerful, powerful thoughts there. My question here is, we hear so much about omni-channel marketing, and there's so many different definitions. How would you describe omni-channel marketing to our listeners, and why is it such a buzz? What is so special about this way of thinking that has transformed how marketers operate?
Sure. So if we kind of take a step back, before kind of omni-channel marketing was really there, things were kind of in a multi-channel type avenue. You had your digital marketing and your print ads, and you probably your traditional TV and radio spots. But the thing is those avenues are typically not interconnected, and they're not always interconnected through a story, kind of leaping from each other. And what omnichannel marketing allows you to do is to, one, access multiple avenues of delivery, be it email, text messaging, social media, and all the other avenues. But then you're able to tell a consistent story, and that's what people are also looking for. Even further, is it allows you to customize the story. Case in point is that, a real omni-channel campaign and presence would be that you have a story that kind of customizes, let's say, one segment and region of a certain country, and let's say, in this case, let's say the U.S., that you tell a certain story that's really resonant for an area kind of in the Southwest versus one that's, like where I'm at in the Pacific Northwest. So, versus just kind of doing a universal kind of blanket across the nation approach, you can customize that. And that's where that information from real world data, from other, from real collection from the marketing campaigns kind of come back. And being able to adapt and adjust and pivot to that more frequently is better.
Scott, that's really powerful. And I preface what I'm about to say. This will be the worst pun in history. Are you suggesting omnichannel marketing allows you to be more surgical in your approach and in how you get the brand messages out there? So two aspects to it, as I understand. There is a unification aspect where you're unifying the experience across different channels. And then the second piece is you're more agile and it's more personalized, where you can tailor the messages. So it's bring it all together and personalize the delivery. Is that kind of the big idea here?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you're going on an approach for omnichannel marketing, it's depending on what your activity is, it will kind of vary in its depth, level, and width. If you're doing a product launch, let's say, that might probably take on more of like a national form. But if you are, if you have a broad portfolio of products, you may want to kind of target specific regions. In marketing, we call it geotagging. And being able to do that can have more an effect for getting patients and HCPs to hopefully adopt and either buy or prescribe your products more frequently. Versus the kind of doing the broader scope one that's more of informative, just kind of creating getting people aware of things.
More of a blanket approach. You're just firing a bunch of it's more of kitchen sink. If I go back to my college days, how I would respond to the long answer questions is throw it all in there, hopefully something sticks, versus this is being very nuanced around who the individual is and putting that audience member at the center of it. Is that kind of the idea, making it more
Absolutely
audience-centric? Got it.
It's got to be customer centric, and in most cases, really more patient centric. Because the more patient centric the value is, and that the physician then sees, the more often they're obviously going to probably either utilize your product, prescribe it, but then they also feel more empowered as well to be able to talk to that patient about it and be able to discuss potentially hopefully the outcomes they've seen from other patients.
Yeah, that makes sense, Scott. And stepping back, what has been the impact of this omnichannel approach in the industry? What have you seen over the years in terms of brand teams that are adopting an approach like that? How is their execution changed?
Well, I mean, omnichannel, ideally is really still kind of relatively new, if you will. I mean, it's probably only really been around for a few years. Before that, especially if you want to talk from an education standpoint, a lot of it was kind of the brick and mortar of, meeting face to face, and and then maybe you were sent some, DVDs or CDs and manuals, to learn, from an outside perspective. Sales reps would, typically engage face to face, but now, it's got to be more virtual, which requires people to really get their information honed. And their engagements really kind of specific. And then when it comes time for those face-to-face engagements is to be really specific on them and have a purpose behind them. And then on the marketing aspect, it is the fact that now with the platforms that are out there and for the data that we are able to leverage, is to be able to take customers on a journey, and that could be through an email journey, email campaign journey. It could be through a social media journey, and try to tell a story and all the elements that really kind of make a really good story come together. Of having the challenge. And then kind of having the product hopefully be the hero, and then having the data to kind of back that up is really what people really kind of want to get when they want to be able to communicate a full kind of rounded marketing campaign combined with good quality, and not only just sales education and learning, but more importantly the patient aspect of educating them.
Yeah, Scott, really interesting. And I agree. Even in our experience, what we are seeing is some of the more forward-thinking organizations are really taking that omni-channel approach. And the best part is there is today tools that enable that, and it's not that the tactical execution requires you to build the infrastructure from the ground up. It really is having the strategic approach towards that. And one thing that I love that you mentioned is just closing the loop out on the data side of things, which is interesting. Our focus is on the education side of things, and we're bringing that omni-channel approach on the education for educational activities and tactics. And what we see is same way for brand teams, that data just becomes such a critical component, and also for buy-in in the organizations to get senior leadership behind projects like this. Is that what Scott, that you're also seeing on kind of the upstream sales and marketing side of things?
Yeah, what I do start seeing a shift is the fact that education, at least when I was kind of initially kind of going through it, it was kind of a thing that kind of just had to be there. It was an important aspect, particularly for the sales team, but it was not kind of thought in a broader scope. Meaning the fact that typically education was relegated to HR, and they had their learning platform, which was typically kind of filled with kind of an open basket of typical education and training materials, on top of kind of the regulatory and compliance training that every organization has to have. But now, what I've seen the evolvement, especially over probably I'd say the last 5 to 8 years, is really kind of opening it up more broadly for the sales channel to not only just learn kind of let's say the macro learning, kind of just the big stuff, the big honking, product materials. Maybe it's also some of the kind of the clinical understanding and background, but then, kind of honing that, in flying, there's a little a knob on the wheel that's called a trim tab, and it just makes a small course correction. And that's the thing with sales teams is, you can teach them the big stuff, but it's the small things that make the big difference. And I think that, with kind of an omni-channel educational approach, we can't teach them everything all at once, but what we need to have is you need to be able to have all that information there, and it needs to be accessible for them when they need it, how they need it, and almost at will, and leveraging, the advanced technologies like AI and machine learning.
Scott, thank you for sharing that. And I agree that speed to information is so critical. It's how we live, right? We pick up our phones and we ask Siri and Alexa the questions that we may have in our day to day. Certainly, same holds true for when you're dealing with so much clinical complex data. So you bring up a very interesting point of omni-channel education. I know we've thrown it around even in this call just a couple of times. Scott, what is that vision behind omni-channel education, which it sounds like taking principles of omni-channel marketing and bringing that into omni-channel in the educational context? In your viewpoint, what does that look like for an organization?
Yeah, so even though they're they are kind of separate entities, if you will, they absolutely shake hands, especially for marketing in an omnichannel kind of campaign or in an engagement. And the reason why is that when you're taking the patient through, let's say, their care, patient care journey, there's multiple facets from the moment they're kind of getting assessed, to just kind of understand, what they may have, to once they're actually diagnosed, to when they're going through their treatment, and then when they're, either post-discharge or when they've been prescribed, certain medication and that follow-up. So education is absolutely a part of every one of those steps, along with just, obviously the awareness and education around, the product that they've been either given or they've used. And then on top of it is that, omnichannel in and of itself, just like marketing, has its multiple components, not just engaging and training salespeople, but also other folks within the organization, your MSLs and your clinical folks, and then, obviously your HCPs, and then can be leveraged for your patient education.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott, for sharing that. And absolutely, across the care continuum, where education plays such a critical role, and you alluded to that too, as well as, maybe 5 or 7 years ago, education was seen more of a check the box. What's very interesting is we've now been in boardrooms over, I think, 1,000 or 2,000 times just in the last couple of years. And one of the things that we've seen consistently is it used to be just the way on the marketing side of things, it used to be just a kitchen sink approach for all these different learners, where you had education teams, maybe sales education, medical education, and then on the downstream marketing side of things, obviously HCP education. And it was a lot of educational tactics just slapped together, where for sales rep, it was interesting where we found that a given sales rep would have a classroom training, a post-training webinar, a training reinforcement application that they had on their phone. They would have a virtual role play application. They would have a field coaching application. They would have their ride-alongs. They would have their national sales meetings. So all these different tactics, they were just getting bombarded with that. And to your point, it was a one-size-fits-all approach. And then what we started seeing were forward-thinking companies were saying, okay, how can we stitch all of this together so we get better experience, more personalization, and more data on the back end, which is very interesting parallels how brand teams have evolved. We're seeing sales education, medical education also evolve in those directions.
Yeah, it's true. I think the more, more the silos within the organization that can be, broken down and that are also more engaged in the learning process. And let's say in this case for, a rep kind of coming in, is that, it takes at least a good year or more for them to really, get up the skills and the information to really feel comfortable and really be able to engage. And I think being able to have other aspects of the business, such as folks from either patient access and the MSLs to, have a piece into that learning process so that they understand the value and where to leverage these value assets within the organization and how they work within the field is more of a benefit for the rep. And as you said, the more consolidated, so that your tech stack and the organization, isn't so prolific that they've got multiple things they got to log into, that there's just one place that they can go for all of that, and that they have a good kind of, let's say, consistent regimen of not only just materials, but access to advanced things such as coaching and field sales training, and that it's engaging. So that, maybe there's some gamification to it, on top of kind of the standard quizzing and testing that these things do. But they are part of a good kind of a regimented, kind of, let's say, university, level of training for them, so they feel supported.
Absolutely, Scott. Scott, zooming out of some of the tactics and going back to strategy for a moment, you mentioned that importance of breaking down silos, and in that spirit, how has the relationship between how's training and development, i.e., education, how has that relationship evolved with marketing teams and sales teams over time in your experience?
In my experience and where I've worked is that I've certainly worked to kind of break those down if they did exist, but where I have seen them is that sales and marketing obviously naturally need to be working together, but pulling in the expertise of folks like the MSLs that really have the harnessed knowledge of what's going on out there in clinical trials and disease databases, around certain therapies and disease states, and and leveraging that education, along with how kind of the reimbursement market is going with market access, and then also the folks that are in HEOR is really really important for not only just the marketing team to understand it, but for the sales team to understand, maybe even their specific region. Because now as we start stepping back out into the market more, it's going to be really important to be able to understand, how, a sales rep, certain territory is kind of acting, meaning the fact that, because there's, every state has kind of its different own phase levels, and because of the fact that, there's different reimbursements for states, if it's Medicare, it is really kind of understanding all those dynamics. And, and that ties in not only, how sales needs to engage into those regions, but also how marketing can then use, their campaigns and marketing dollars wisely.
Scott, really powerful. And one thing that you alluded to is just all these different, how these teams can drive that confluence to shape promotion moving forward. And that was actually going to be my next question is, what is that? I mean, no one really knows, but what does that future promotional landscape really look like in your view?
Obviously, digital is going to play a huge impact to that. On the social media side, I don't know exactly where that's going to go, just because there seems to be some new platform that pops up almost every week. So, we'll see kind of, where that's going to lead. But I do think that obviously the digital aspect is going to be here to stay. And I think that as more of these AI type platforms grow, with the ability to become not only just more intelligent, but also because they're collecting the data in a more meaningful way, like your Alexas and your Siris and so forth, is that, to have a virtual assistant, isn't just going to be some kind of neat little feature. It's really going to be something that people are going to want to utilize because it's going to be, right there. I can get the information I need, or I can do the things that I want, so that my life isn't, feel as disrupted, or it's more efficient. I can get more done in my day, or even in my my engagements. In the case for education, especially for like the HCPs, is to be able to pull up instead of having to call my rep or my MSL, is to have that that device or or that app right there, and just be able to talk to it normally and have it pop up with the information that I want right now.
Really powerful. So more digital connections and channels, so to speak, to get the messaging and information, trusted information, as you said it before, Scott, out to HCPs and patients. And we also talked about the role of MSLs as those educators of the clinical data, both internally and outside the organization. What's the future of the sales rep in your view, as we get out of this pandemic and the world kind of re-equilibrates to something, which none of us really know what that would look like, but in your prediction, what does that look like?
Yeah, so right now, some of the survey data that I've been seeing is that a lot of physicians are actually kind of liking either the virtual engagement and not having as many reps kind of come in and disrupt their day, and I mean that in the most positive way. But there are physicians, even when I used to go and engage face to face, physicians that were meeting with 10 plus reps a day, and that can be quite interruptive for them. But I think virtual is going to be definitely a piece of that. And some of the challenges that I see right now are reps that are used to doing that kind of traditional face-to-face and, kind of popping in to say hello to kind of keep that connection, are now kind of forced to do that initial, virtual meeting because either the facilities, don't allow reps to even come in, or there's basically got to be kind of a pathway or a process before a meeting can even happen. And so I think from a sales rep standpoint, they're going to have to upskill themselves and their virtual environment, such as having a proper background and lighting and good a good camera and microphones, so they look professional and can present themselves. And then when it comes time to be able to meet with that physician face to face, because obviously there are products that actually do need that kind of physical interaction for demos. The doctors need to kind of have that touch and feel to them. That'll be just part of that sales process. So I do think that we are now going to be in this kind of virtual aspect. I think from even from a marketing side of it, is that marketing is even going to have to leverage more of that kind of engagement to assist the sales rep to kind of be able to kind of penetrate certain entities if they don't already have a pathway in, so that they can then get in there, and then that sales can do what they need to do from an education and engagement standpoint and nurturing standpoint. But I think even from a an accounts management and aspect of it, is that the virtual piece is going to be here, and even though I know that there's the kind of the Zoom anxiety, if you will, of kind of getting on and being seen, it's gonna be something that is just part of the natural training that reps are gonna have to go through, I think.
Scott, that's an interesting perspective. So if I'm hearing that, what you're saying is there is a place for a rep or an educator, really, someone to teach the healthcare providers on the clinical benefits and so on and so forth. There's that role that sales reps still play, but how they play changes, the medium changes, it's more virtual, and there's an opportunity to really, as you said it, upskill them. And so they're more equipped with the skills to better navigate this virtual environment. There is that place for sales reps with more augmented skills, essentially, is
right. As we discussed earlier, it's about how they want to be engaged. It's kind of communicating with your customer in the way they want to be communicated in. And so, the fact that, it allows the physician, if you've got some material or thing that you want to present, it allows them hopefully to read over it, look over it, and, and then when they come and engage with you virtually, you'd have more of a meaningful conversation that's, where you've got their attention, versus in the hallway where, you're trying to capture, that 2 minutes at most, and you might only get 7 seconds as they're walking to their next appointment. But at least here now you have something to engage with them in and be able to deliver a little more value. And then that way, when you do hopefully eventually have that face-to-face conversation, it's more on point, it's specific, it's more meaningful, and you're giving your customer more of what they want when they want it.
Yeah. Scott, very interesting, and a thought that popped into my mind is that in this new world, successful sales reps are the ones that can play different instruments, where in that hall call they can be precise and deliver the bite-sized clinical story, as well as on a Zoom call they can hold a meaningful, thoughtful conversation for a longer period of time, and not just have the canned messaging. So that versatility becomes important. Really powerful insight there. Scott, as we're going through this conversation and talking about just what does the world post-pandemic look like for life sciences companies, the theme that's jumping out to me is commercial success is just tied to the whole village coming together. I think that's what I'm learning from you today is it really is going to take a village. And that ought to be reflected in all our tactics as well. As you said, brand teams stitching together their tactics, education teams stitching together their tactics, different teams and their workflows coming together. And I think as an industry, we need to be more optimized and efficient and really work together, breaking down silos, as you said.
Absolutely, I think that's kind of tantamount. And the part of the big reason is that because of, like we've seen with COVID, is there's been the skepticism, from the just kind of, let's say, the citizenry, if you will, around efficacy and where information's coming from, who to believe, who not to believe. And so I think the education aspects of it is really going to be critical, that not only just having the healthcare experts, but also the industry and those that play a role within the industries, like the MSLs and the sales reps, all kind of singing in the same tune, all backed up by data, backed up by real world evidence, is critical. Because one thing I definitely do see in social media networks, particularly like Facebook and groups, is in the lack of feeling confident of the information that is out there, people kind of coalesce together and try to figure it out amongst themselves. And so I think it's going to be important that the resources and the patient care hubs need to be there. And on top of it, I think the healthcare industry, particularly like the hospitals and medical care facilities, is to have the resources for patient care navigation, to kind of help navigate the patient through the beginning of their journey to their end, and also in their post-care, follow-ups, so that they can see how they're adhering to it. And to combine that is that, we've certainly see payers having those kind of patient care hubs for information. And we've certainly seen, obviously, life science companies in the industry to also have some of those things there. But as I said before, there's a lot of voices all kind of going at once, and it's kind of, which one do I listen to? And I think that does need to have a little more kind of consolidation and communication.
Powerful, Scott. And there's an old saying, charity begins at home. So to have that, to be able to coalesce voice outside the organization, that there needs to be that consolidation and coalescing of that voice around the data and within the regulatory framework, of course, within the organization. And certainly technology has an important role to play regardless of which department you're in, but then these teams to work together. Really powerful theme there, Scott. So let's build on that. And this would kind of the last segment of our podcast here is, what's you talk to senior strategic leaders all the time as you're consulting them. What's kind of your prescription to, let's say, if there's a CEO of an emerging biotech company, or you're a VP of a large enterprise company, what's your prescription to them so they can start creating that confluence internally, with that North Star of creating that confluence and coalescing the around the patient externally? But kind of what would you recommend to a emerging or mid-market company, a C-suite there, and a VP at a big company? Would love to get your take on that.
Well, I think that the key thing is some of the foundational stuff. So whatever product it is that you're planning to have out there, that support and that product has to be launched soundly, and that means making sure that you hopefully have the kind of advisory board and expertise behind it that understands the product, understands its utilization and where it's going to apply and bring the most value. And then also educating the clinical folks and the sales team so that they can support the primary users of that product, particularly, especially if it's medical device, is going to be the foundation for everything. And then from that is going to be the data. Because that is really going to be the engine that drives everything else eventually. In the beginning, it's really all about just kind of getting and building the steam around, awareness and the value proposition that and the challenge that your particular product or drug is solving. But on the back end, it's going to be kind of the data that's going to help kind of build that up and support it, and hopefully bring and show the evidence of the outcomes and benefits that are going to help the product grow and expand. And that could be in channel extensions, or being able to help grow into other enhanced products down the line for other therapies. But that would be obviously the key place that I would start from there. And then, from that, would always, keep the education piece in mind and built to scale. So as that data and that information starts to come in, is to leverage it in the right way, because the more you, own, if you will, or the more you tap into the care continuum of the patient journey, I think the more it will be top of mind. And the more that you will have access and information to be able to leverage and communicate.
Yeah. Scott, so powerful, packed with insights. I'm a visual thinker, so as I'm hearing that in my mind, what's popping up in my brain is it's almost a visual of these concentric circles where right at the core and the nucleus, you have the patient and the patient journey. The ring outside of that is the real world evidence and the data that we collect as patients go through that journey with your product, and using that data and then creating that flywheel in the organization, breaking down silos, driving education, and getting that story out again to the market using different tactics, which is both marketing tactics and educational tactics. But the theme there being thinking more omnichannel, thinking about breaking down silos and personalizing the messages, and then this becomes a perpetual loop, essentially, where you're putting the patient at the center, collecting more data, getting that story, and educating all the different stakeholders around that.
Yeah, exactly. In my mind, the way I kind of view it, I view it almost as a three-dimensional sphere, where in the center of it is the patient. In and around all of that is all the things that we've talked about, but nothing's linear. They all kind of interconnect based upon where the patient is, where the HCP is, what's kind of going on dynamically in the market, and how we pivot and move. And there's not a one size fits all. It has to be customized. And the platform and the information and the access, it's all there. It's the ability to be able to pivot and move, and also keep an eye on it so that you can do that proactively as much as possible.
Yeah. Scott, thank you so much for your time today. To all our listeners, put the patients at the center. Yes, the healthcare landscape and the promotional landscape moving forward is complex. However, it will take a village, and collectively your teams, they can cut through the complexity. And by putting patient at the center and that North Star, there's also tremendous opportunity. So, Scott, once again, thank you for your time. So many insights. I know I'm walking away from this conversation with my IQ higher than it was coming into it. So thank you, and it's always a pleasure. And can't wait till we meet again in Seattle or Toronto. It's always a pleasure, sir. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you, Parth. Glad to be here.
If you found value in our podcast and know of a change agent who is working to disrupt the life sciences industry, please nominate them using the form below.